Let's start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that you give us the opportunity to celebrate your birth and freedom, that we don't have to worry about people coming into our church and not letting us worship freely to you. Thank you for sending your Son. Thank you for sending so many great saints to be examples to us, especially St. Maximilian Kolbe, who we're going to speak about tonight. We ask that you send him to be here with us so that I can speak to our students tonight about his life, but also so that he can impress on their hearts at least one thing from his life that he would like them to take home from tonight. And we ask for safe travel for everybody this holiday season, and we ask that everybody's families are safe and healthy for the next forever. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. All right, so St. Maximilian Kolbe. Like I mentioned in there, he's kind of a substitute saint for the one I was going to do. The one I was going to teach, as I thought about her spirituality, it's kind of intense, and I thought it might be a little confusing. So I decided to kind of shift gears and do another saint. St. Maximilian is, he's kind of, he has his own intensity, but I think you guys are going to get more out of learning about him tonight. So he's a saint that he lived. He's not one of these saints from like the 1200s, right? He lived mostly in the 20th century, and so I think you'll be able to relate a little bit about the history around his life as well. So St. Maximilian, he was actually not born with the name Maximilian. He was born Raymond Kolbe in 1894 in Poland, what is now Poland. At the time, Poland was it wasn't actually a country. It had been divided up, and for 200 or 300 years, Poland would unify, and then they would get invaded, they'd get split up again. And so at this time, the land that is now Poland was divided between Austria-Hungary, which was one country, one kingdom, another place called Prussia, and then Russia. And so it was divided, but there was there was a unifying force for the Polish people, and that was their Catholic faith. That was the thing that unified them as a Polish people. And so they would still speak their native language, and they would still celebrate Mass. And the three different regions had different levels of freedoms at that time. And so, and you'll hear about that a little bit as we tell our story tonight. So Raymond, he was one of 5 children. He was one of 3 that survived, and we've talked about this before, how at certain times in history that the infant mortality rate was much higher. And so he lost 2 of his siblings when they were infants. But he was one of 3 boys that survived, and he was kind of a wild child. He, it wasn't like he was out like robbing banks and causing mayhem and things like that. But he was just a pretty wild kid, and it kind of frustrated his mother. And so one day he had gotten into some sort of trouble, and she was frustrated. She said, "Raymond, what is going to become of you?" And this really kind of influenced him, and he was just like, it just shocked him. And so they were raised Catholic, and so he went into the church. He was about 12 at the time. He went into the church, and he started praying in front of the statue of the Blessed Mother. And he's just like, what's going to become of me? This question just really weighed on him. And all of a sudden, the Blessed Virgin Mary appears. Now, there's contradictory stories about whether she actually appeared, or this was a vision, or this was a dream. But for all intents and purposes, Mary appeared to him. And he realized this is Mary. And he says, "Mary, my mother says, what's going to become of me? What's going to become of me?" And she's standing there in front of him, and she holds out 2 crowns, a red crown and a white crown. And she says, "I need you to pick one of these crowns. The red crown is martyrdom. The white crown is purity." So Raymond's a pretty bold kid. He's the kid that if you say, do you want one or the other, he'd like both. And he says, "I'll take both." And Mary smiles and disappears. So this really affects him. And he went back home, and he was talking to his mom, and his mom noticed a change instantly in him. And he was much more reserved, and she thought, well, maybe he's just kind of feeling down about what I asked him. But this went on for days, and finally she's like, "What's going on with you?" And he told her what happened. And she was kind of like, okay, maybe it's a dream, maybe it's just something you kind of made up, but it definitely had an influence on him. And so much so that within the next year, he and one of his brothers decided that they were going to go become Franciscan friars. So he was only 13, but at that time you could enter the novitiate in some of these friaries at that time. He and his brother went to do this. They went to a Franciscan friary and started staying there. And things were going great. He was a really smart kid, and so they were glad to have him because he was like good in math and science and all these types of things. And he was like, this was kind of his what he thought he was going to do, one of his choices. So the other things he wanted to do is he was really, really good at math and engineering. So he thought, well, I'll be an engineer. And there was other times he's like, well, I really want to fight for Poland's independence. So I want to be a soldier. But I really like the religious life too. And so he was just kind of like he was kind of a wild kid. He's just kind of indecisive of what he wants to do. And so after about 2 or 3 years of being in the Franciscan friary, he and his brother kind of like, I'm not sure this is for us. I'm just not feeling it anymore. And so, unbeknownst to him, what had happened is his other brother had left home as well, I believe, to go become a friar somewhere. And so his mother and father, being very devout, had decided that they were going to separate in their marriage. Now, not because they were fighting, but because they both decided they wanted to join religious orders. And it was, in some places, it's okay for the husband and the wife to separate their marriage, still be married, but then they were going to go off and join religious orders. And so they did this. And so basically, Raymond and his brother had an appointment with the head of the monastery, and they were going to tell him, we're going to leave. And so literally, while they're waiting in the office to talk to the chancellor of the seminary, their mother comes in, right? She just appears at that same time. She knocks on the door, she comes in and tells the boys what she's about to do. And they're both just so taken aback by this that they're like, wow. And then all of a sudden they're called in and they go into the head of the seminary and they said, we want to stay. I mean, this affected them so much they decided to stay. And so they did. And when Raymond was 18, he was made a friar. He had taken his final vows, and at that time he took the name Maximilian. Now I don't know if it's different in different places or different orders. I don't know if he was given the name Maximilian. I don't know if he chose the name Maximilian. It wasn't really clear. But the name Maximilian means the greatest. And so some people thought, I got the impression that maybe he chose it, because some people thought, he's really prideful, I'm the greatest, that type of thing. But the reason that he liked the name so much is because he didn't think about it as him being the greatest. He felt that it was him making the greatest offering to God. He felt that he was going to make that greatest offering. And so that's the way he was looking at it, the opposite of what everyone else is looking at it as. So remember your history that's going on. This is about, he takes his final vows in about 1912. Okay, so 1912, so he's 18 years old. Right before World War I, right? So World War I starts in 1914. Now, he's living in Italy, he's living in Poland, and there's some fighting going on, but most of the war is going on over in Germany and France and Belgium, in that area. That's where a lot of the ground battles are going on. So, after he takes his final vows, they send him off to Italy, right before World War I. And Italy there wasn't a lot of land war in Italy as much as there was up in the north. And so he was a little worried about going to Italy, though. He had heard stories from other people that, the women there, they were waiting for the seminarians so that they could pull them out of the seminary and, help and have them go against their vows. And he heard that the men there were just waiting to rob you and to make you part of the mafia and all this kind of thing. And so he was a little worried about going. So he told his superior, he says, I don't want to go to Italy. I don't want to go to Rome. And his superior said, well, you got to go. He says, all right, so out of obedience, he goes. After about 3 weeks, he writes a letter to his mother, and he says, all the stories I heard were not true at all. He says, this is a wonderful, wonderful place being in Rome, and I'm really enjoying myself being here. So he starts his studies to become a priest, right? So he's a friar, but he's not a priest yet. And so he spends the next 6 years studying to become a priest before his ordination. in 1917, right about a year before he got ordained, he just noticed that people's devotion to Mary just wasn't as strong as his, and that he just felt like he wanted to bring more people to Mary. And so him and about 5 or 6 other guys that were in the seminary decided that they were going to start a group, and they were going to call it the Militia Immaculata, which means Mary's Army. And so they were going to spread devotion to Mary. And one of the things that they did, that's my candle over here, is they would have this picture of Mary like this, and they always had 2 candles next to it, probably better candles than this. There. And they were always burning like this, and this is like the little altar that they set up for Mary. And so, so this is one thing they did. So they had this devotion to the Blessed Mother. Well, they have their seminary studies, and a couple of the guys are kind of like, I don't think this is going to work. I got other things I got to be doing. And at this time, Maximilian also becomes very sick. He gets tuberculosis. And you've heard us talk about tuberculosis from a few of the other saints that we've talked about. And at this time, it's a deadly disease. And so if you get it, it's hard to get over it. So it's a disease of the lungs. And so he spends a lot of time convalescing with this. And eventually he does start to get better. But by the time that he is getting better, he's basically lost the use of one lung, and his other lung isn't doing so well. So he's kind of weak. He has some hard time breathing, hard time exerting himself. But he does, in April of 1918, he is ordained a priest. And he stays in Rome for about another year to get his doctorate. So he's in Rome until about 1919. And at that time, they send him back to Poland, and he winds up teaching at a seminary near Krakow. Okay, Krakow is one of the major cities in Poland. And by this time the war is over, Poland is reunited now. So there's this Polish country that he can go back to. But, because it's been decimated by being separated and things like that, they've got their Catholic unity and their Polish identity, but politically it's kind of shaky. So he spends a couple of years, 3 years, I believe, teaching at the seminary, and every summer they would send him off to the mountains because the air was better up there, and so he could breathe easier. And over time, he just kept getting better and better and better from the tuberculosis. Not completely cured, but to the point where it didn't affect him as much as it had when he had it at that time. So, so during this time, the Militia Immaculata is really starting to take off. And so he moves to a seminary in, I don't know if I can pronounce it, Grodno, and I'm not sure, it's another major city in Poland, and it's another Franciscan friary, and they start really bringing this on, and they get a hold of they start writing articles, and they start printing a small magazine, and they actually get a printing press, and they start printing this thing off and start distributing it, and it's starting to be distributed all over Poland. And over the next 5 years, literally hundreds of guys start joining their seminary, or actually not their seminary, their order in their monastery. And so it got to the point where between needing more space for the printing function and all these people joining, they needed more space. So they didn't have a lot of money, but they started checking out some areas, and they went. Maximilian goes to very close to Warsaw, and he finds a piece of land there that's for sale by Count Lubecki, and he must have been some political guy. I think he was like a prince or some sort of, prince or a count or something like that. And so they contact his steward. His steward says, here's the price for the land. They find out what the price is, and so Maximilian makes an appointment with the count, and he says that's way too much money. He literally has a cardboard box with his money in that he shows up. He says, this is all we got. And the count says that's not enough. Now, what Maximilian had done when he first went there before he got the invitation, or the offer from the steward, is he had this statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And he went out to the little piece of land, which was right across the street from where the count was, and he sticks this statue, installs this statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary right on the piece of land right near the road. And so he goes to talk to the count then, and here's a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary outside the window, and the count says, yeah, here's the price, and Max says, okay, I guess we're not going to be interested then. So Max turns to leave, and the count says, well, what are you going to do with the statue? And Max goes, well, just leave it there. And he walks out. And so this count, every day he's got to look at this statue staring him in the face across the road. And because the country is very Catholic, to offend the Blessed Virgin Mary would be unthinkable. And so this just wears on him and wears on him and wears on him. And finally he just goes, okay, it's for Mary. And he literally donates this really nice piece of land to Maximilian and the Franciscans so they can build their monastery. So, and what happened was when Maximilian put the statue there, he says, basically, Mary, if you really want this land, you're going to find a way to do it. He just put his total confidence in Mary, right? And he just kept praying, and it happens. So they start in, and they just build up these really crude kind of buildings because, again, they don't have a lot of money, so they build just the basic necessities of what they need. They built some barracks where they could sleep. They built a chapel, so that place so they could put their statue. And they put a place for the printing press so they can continue to print things off. Well, they keep printing and they keep finding ways to distribute it. And by 1930, they are circulating like literally hundreds of thousands of copies of their magazine throughout Poland. And so this thing is really taken off, and people are liking this because it's helping unify them as a people through their faith. And so more and more guys are joining. Well, at this time, somehow they heard about this over in East Asia, and places like Singapore and Shanghai and Japan wanted more of this information. So Maximilian goes to the Superior's order and says, I think we need to go to Japan. And I think we need to go there and we need to set something up. And the Superior says, well, do you have money to do this? And he says, no. He says, do you know Japanese? No. Well, he sends him and 4 other guys to Japan to get this thing started. And so they do. They go there and they start setting up it's called Neopoklanów, which is the city of Mary, and that's what they call the one in Poland, and that's what they call the one in Japan as well. So they go over to Japan. There's other Franciscans there, different in different locations, but they want their own location because they want to be able to have the printing press. And so they're looking around and they find this one piece of land, and it's in a city called Nagasaki. They find this one piece of land and it's really a good location, but it's way too expensive. They don't have money, and so they start looking around, and so it's kind of mountainous near there, and so they start walking around. They find this other piece of land on the back side of this mountain that's real near the city. So they just kind of go around the corner a little bit, and here's this piece of land. It's a terrible piece of land, but it's cheap, and so they get it. And so they start setting up their operation over there. Well, maybe he knew, but it was a premonition. You guys probably recognize the name Nagasaki. Nagasaki is where the second atomic bomb was dropped. Well, because he placed this on the backside of the mountain, the blast took everything out, and the mountain shielded their operation. So for some reason, he felt like this was the place to put it. And I don't know if they said if this is literal or figurative, but it said the blast literally, they said the blast stopped at his doorstep. Now, I don't know if that means they're like literally at the doorstep, or if that meant that, because of where he placed it, they were just saved from it. But it was one of the gifts of one of the things of prophecy that he had, and he had other things like that where he just kind of seemed to know the right thing to do. So he's in Japan from 1930. In about 1936, late 1936, early 1937, he's starting to have more problems with his breathing again. And the doctors there take a chest X-ray, and they are just appalled at the condition of his lungs. And he said, "You need to go home." Now again, keep in mind what's going on. This is late 1930s. And Japan is starting to acquire land and other islands. I believe they invaded Manchuria in 1935, which is over in mainland China, and so they're starting to acquire things too. So the political situation in Japan is becoming unstable as well. So anyway, so Max, he has a bunch of friars there now. It's more than him and the 4 guys. They've got quite a few people there now. So he goes back to Poland, and he starts to convalesce there a little bit. By 1938, they said there were somewhere between 750 and 800 friars in their original piece of land there at Neopoklanów in Poland. So again, when he went back after the seminary, there was 18 guys. And in about 15 years, they were up to almost 800 because of the draw for what they were doing. And so, so this is in 1939. How many of you guys know, again, European history, 1939, what's going on? Anybody? Yes.
Germany invaded Poland.
Yeah, Germany invades Poland. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. And again, they had only been unified again for 20 years, so they were starting to build a government and build an infrastructure, but Germany just walked through. I mean, they just took over Poland in like 3 weeks. The whole country was under Nazi rule. And so, you know, this didn't seem to frighten. I mean, they were frightened, but it didn't seem to deter Maximilian from what he was doing. So in the things that they were publishing, they were speaking out against Nazism. You know, they had been for years. They were speaking out against communism. They were basically saying, this stuff's not Catholic. You guys need to stay solid in your Catholic faith. Well, in 1940, this caught the attention, early 1940, shortly after the invasion, this caught the attention of the Nazis, and he was arrested. Him and a few of the friars were arrested who had been doing the writing. And they were detained for about 3 months, and then for whatever reason, they were released. I don't know if they were just basically said, don't do it again. But again, this did not deter Maximilian, and they kept going. They just kept writing, they kept distributing. By this time, their circulation was about 1 million households. So several million Poles every month were getting their magazine and getting their flyers, and they were really starting to, you know, again, their Catholic faith was unifying them through some really dark times. So in February of 1941, he's arrested again. He had just, you know, the Nazis had just had enough. You've gone too far. And so they arrested him in February of 1941, him and several other friars, and they detained them in a prison there. But in May of 1941, they moved them to Auschwitz. And you guys probably know that name from history. It was a death camp, basically. They moved them there. And so these guys are shipped off to Auschwitz. And they were given some pretty, especially the friars, they were given some of the hardest labor because the guards, they didn't like Catholics. They didn't like the Jews. They you know, over time, they murdered about 6 million Jews during World War II, but there's also like 1 million to 1.5 million Catholics that were murdered at these death camps as well. And so they didn't like the priests, and so they were given hard labor. There was a couple times where the guards beat Maximilian within an inch of his life. They just didn't like him. He wasn't like he was lipping off, but you know, he would just get exhausted and he would just like fall down, and they would just beat him like crazy. They didn't give them much food, but they said that almost every day Maximilian gave half his food to another prisoner. So he was living on literally nothing, and had lost a lot of weight, and he was already weak, remember, because his lungs aren't doing that well. And so he's continuing just looking out for his fellow prisoners. So in late July, they were working out at a work site, but they were also doing things like they were building the ovens where they were cremating the dead people. So they were helping build this camp. I mean, they had no choice. They were slaves, basically. But in late July, a prisoner escaped. And the protocol for when a prisoner escapes is they would line up the whole group that the prisoner escaped, that the group that the prisoner came from who escaped. And they would select 10 prisoners at random, and they would take them to a starvation bunker. And so they basically, there was this one movie I was watching, and it was pretty hard to watch, but they basically just had this big rectangle of people, you know, lined up, and they just separated them out into several lines, and the head of the Gestapo just walked up and down and just went, you, just picked random people to go into the starvation bunker. And so these people are, you know, they're dragged up to the front by the guards, and there's this one gentleman, and he's just like, no, I've got a wife, I got kids, you know, please don't take me. And this stirs something in Maximilian, and he boldly steps forward right up to where the head guards and the head of the SS, the head of the camp, is standing right there. And they're like, what do you want? And they were ready to club him. And he says, I want to take his place. And they were floored. They were like, what? What? That didn't even register with them. And he says, yeah, I want to take that gentleman's place over there. And so they realized he was a priest. They're like, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, you go. We want to get rid of you, because he had been holding secret masses. He had been hearing confessions. He was keeping everybody's morale up. So they were just looking to like they knew that there was something about this guy that was keeping these other people, giving them hope. And so they're like, oh yeah, fine, go. And so the gentleman who he replaced actually survived the death camp and later said, all I could do was thank him with my eyes. And so Maximilian and the other 9 guys, they're marched off to the starvation bunker. They're asked to take off their clothes. They get into this little cell, which is about 10 by 10. And they put them in there and they just give them nothing. And they're going to starve to death. And so the guards that were there, they were used to hearing, kind of, without getting graphic, they were used to just kind of hearing kind of what went on. People were screaming and they were yelling and they were swearing and all this was going on. But out of this bunker, all they could hear were hymns and the rosary and like joy just coming out of this starvation bunker. And these guards, they just couldn't figure it out. They're like, later on, they just were really impressed by this. This really left a mark on them. And they were like, we don't know what it was, but there was something about this guy, and he just kept everybody's hope alive in there. And so this just went on and on and on. But now the voices get a little quieter, a little quieter, a little quieter because they're starting to starve to death. And after about 15 or 16 days of this, most of the other gentlemen had passed away, but they died in a state of grace because Maximilian was hearing their confessions, and he was actually able, somehow he was able to still do Mass. I don't know if he got any bread or if they just did the liturgy, but they died joyfully somehow. Okay. Now, like, I miss lunch and I'm going nuts. These guys already are on eating nothing, and then they're asked to starve to death, and they die with joy. And Maximilian leads them through this. I can't even fathom that. And so on August 14th, 1941, guard walks in there, and there's one guy left who's still alive, and it's Maximilian. And he walks in, and Maximilian looks up at him, and he just has this look of forgiveness on his face, like, I'm forgiving you. And the guy he just can't figure it out. And somebody else comes in, and they give him an injection, and he dies. And so he died a martyr's death. So he had the white crown of purity, through his vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience as a Franciscan. He lived that out. The red crown of martyrdom, he died a martyr. And so there are no relics, official relics of his body, because he was sent to the ovens and burned up along with all the other prisoners as well. The only relics that I've heard of, and there could certainly be more, is that if you look at the picture in the sheet I gave you, you can see that he had this big beard in some of the pictures. And there was when he came back from Japan, so they grew this big beard thinking, we're missionaries, and so they're going to listen to us more if we look like missionaries, type of thing. And so when he came back to Europe, he shaved the beard off at some point. And so the barber knew of his sanctity, and he saved the beard. Thinking, this guy's going to be a saint someday, I'm going to save the beard. So it's just something that he did. And so apparently there are these relics of him somewhere. But his case for canonization got opened up soon after World War II. In about 1944, his mother finally heard, they finally got word to his mother that he had died a martyr's death and how he died. And she said she recalled what he had told her when he was 12 years old about taking the crown of martyrdom. She goes, I knew he would die a martyr's death. So his case for canonization opens, and actually one of the other friars was a big proponent of it, and he was going to Rome and he was trying to get it all taken care of. Well, he is finally, he was beatified in 1972, I think, 1971. And in 1982, he was up for canonization, and Pope John Paul II, who's also Polish, had canonized him. And now the big discussion is whether he was going to be canonized as a witness to the faith, or whether he was going to be canonized as a martyr, because technically by the word of the law for being canonized as a martyr, he didn't fit the description, because it wasn't like they said, you're Catholic, we're going to kill you. He stepped in for somebody else. And so up until the point when John Paul II walked out to give the Mass for the liturgy, did they know? Because he was wearing red. And that's a sign of martyrdom, and people just roared. They're like, yeah, because they knew he was a martyr. And John Paul said he's a martyr because he died in a Christ-like manner. He stepped in for somebody else, like Christ stepped in for us. He said, so he is a martyr. And so Maximilian is, he's a powerful saint. He's got a lot of patronages. I mean, like I said, one of his big patronages is of like publishers and the media. So we need to pray to him to help our media out right now. But because of all the publishing he did, he's also the patron saint of drug addicts, political prisoners, families, prisoners, pro-life movement, and amateur radio. I think they've also added like some of the new media stuff to him because he was always using the newest and latest and the greatest media to get the message out. So one of my friends, Father Rick Heilman, loves Max Kolbe because he's like, I'm going to do what Father Maximilian Kolbe does. I'm going to use the latest media to get my, the message out about the church. And so he's the inspiration for a lot of people who are trying to get the word out about the Catholic Church and what we believe and those types of things. That's most of what I have to say. I don't know much about the miracles that led up to his canonization, but I do know that he's got a lot of miracles attributed to him now, so he'd be a powerful intercessor for us to pray to. Do you guys have any questions? Brenda? I mean, I think he was pretty much tied to the Franciscans. I know where you're going with it because I know your aunt was over there. I don't know for sure. I didn't see a lot of the detail in there. There's a couple sources I didn't get to read fully either. So I don't know. There was another Franciscan group that was in Nagasaki, and I don't know how many different ones there were, but there was one group, and I think it was this other group of Franciscans where he started, that when the bomb dropped in Nagasaki, everything else around it was destroyed, and here's this monastery. Just somehow miraculously got saved. Yeah, I'm sure it's probably out there where he was and what other groups he was working with. I just didn't find it. So. I'm going to ask you guys then to get out your journals, and you can turn to the next blank page or the next section on the page there. And as you can see, there's still quite a line for confession, but if you want to get in it, and knowing Father Rob, he will stay here until he hears all the confessions. So, but I would invite you guys, there's no rush because there's at least 10 people ahead of you. I would invite you guys to just spend some time. You have a time? Mine's on my phone there. 7 what? 7:20. Okay, good. So I'm going to invite you guys to spend at least 10 or 15 minutes with us. I'm going to read a reflection to you guys, and I want you to spend some time reflecting on it in your journals. If you get done with it, what I want you to do is I just want you to spend some time with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. I know the ambo's in the way here, but just spend some time with Jesus and just ask him, all right, what do you want me to take away from St. Maximilian's life? Why is he important to me? Right? I'm a teenager in Verona, Wisconsin. He died a martyr's death in World War II. Okay, how does that relate to me? Let Jesus speak to you about that. Okay, and just spend some time with this. Don't whip through the reflection and sit there and chit chat with your neighbor and things like that. I'm going to ask you guys not to interact with anybody around you for the next 15 minutes or so. All right. So I want to read this reflection to you, and just listen to start, and then just write some things down. And if you feel like you're like really close to your neighbor and that's too tight, spread out, because maybe you're going to want to write some stuff down and you don't want someone peeking over your shoulder or feeling like someone's going to peek over your shoulder. And again, the only person reading this journal is you and whoever you choose to share it with. So write what's in your heart. It can be really powerful for you. Okay. So on your next blank section there, whether it's a page or whether it's continuing on the page you're on, you can write today's date, which is December 22nd, 2021. And the title of this is The Group of Frogs. And I think you'll see how St. Maximilian fits into this. As a group of frogs was traveling through the woods, two of them fell into a deep pit. When the other frogs crowded around the pit and saw how deep it was, they told the two frogs that there was no hope left for them. However, the two frogs decided to ignore what the others were saying, and they proceeded to try to jump out of the pit. Despite their efforts, the group of frogs at the top of the pit were still saying that they should just give up, that they would never make it out. Eventually, one of the frogs took heed to what the others were saying, and he gave up, falling down to his death. The other frog continued to jump as hard as he could. Again, the crowd of frogs yelled at him to stop the pain and just die. He jumped even harder, and finally he made it out. When he got out, the other frog said, "Did you not hear us?" The frog explained to them that he was deaf. He thought they were encouraging him the entire time. So people's words can have a big effect on others' lives. Think about what you say before it comes out of your mouth. It might just be the difference between life and death.